Colleen, stay by the counter for me. Several residents' accounts are now called part of this investigation.
I've taken care of those residents for years.
For 11 years, Colleen Aristay was trusted with the most vulnerable people in Sparrowdale, Maine. What investigators found in a single folder inside her home dismantled every year of that trust.
Their families are questioning withdrawals they don't recognize, Colleen.
Families usually start asking questions long after something changes.
In one afternoon, the handcuffs would close on Colleen Aristay's wrists in the driveway of the Cape-style house she had lived in for 19 years. 11 years at Sparrowdale Senior Care. 9 residents drained of approximately $470,000. 4 years of forged withdrawal slips captured, slip by slip, on a regional bank's imaging server she did not know existed. The folder county detectives pulled from her hall closet contained the names of residents who had already died in her care and residents who were still living, still waiting for breakfast trays she would never deliver again. Pay attention to the dollar amount in this case. Now think about how long it took for anyone to notice. 4 years, 9 victims. Drop your guess in the comments. How many tellers do you think handed over cash to this woman without ever calling the resident on file? Subscribe if you want to see how the system actually fails the people who can least afford to lose. Colleen Marie Aristay was born in 1971 in Bucksport, Maine, the middle of 3 daughters in a family that lived 4 blocks from the paper mill that employed her father for 31 years. Her mother worked the late shift at the IGA on Main Street and kept the household running on a wage that never quite stretched. Colleen grew up understanding what it meant to count change at the register and to make a winter coat last 3 seasons. She graduated from Bucksport High School in 1989 with respectable grades, a part-time job at Hannaford bagging groceries, and no clear path to the 4-year college her guidance counselor kept pushing. She took the practical road. In the fall of 1989, she enrolled in the nursing program at Eastern Maine Community College in Bangor, commuting 45 minutes each way in a 1982 Chevette her uncle had handed down. Her instructors remembered her as quiet, attentive, and unusually patient with the geriatric simulation cases. Her clinical evaluations from her second year described her as calm under pressure, comfortable with elderly patients, and particularly attentive to families. In May of 1992, she received her associate's degree and her nursing pin. She passed the NCLEX-RN on her first attempt that June. Her first nursing job paid $11.75 an hour at Pinecrest Manor, a long-term care facility in Brewer. She worked the 3 to 11 shift for 2 years, then transferred to days, then took a charge nurse position. She married Bruce Aristay, a heating and cooling technician she had met at a friend's wedding in 1994, in a small ceremony at a Baptist church in Orrington. They bought a 2-bedroom cape on Spruce Hollow Road in Sparrowdale in 1996 for $64,000 and a 30-year mortgage. Their daughter Kelsey was born in 1998. For the next decade, Colleen worked steadily at 3 different Maine long-term care facilities: Pinecrest in Brewer, Bayside Manor in Belfast, and finally Sparrowdale Senior Care in her own town, where she was hired in 2013 as a floor nurse on the skilled nursing wing. The Sparrowdale job paid $28 an hour at intake, with shift differentials. It was the closest assignment to her house she had ever held. Her commute, when she did not stop for coffee, was 4 minutes. Her annual evaluations across her first 6 years at Sparrowdale described her in language the families of her residents would later read and reread with disbelief. Demonstrates exceptional rapport with residents and family members. Trusted by skilled nursing population, particularly residents with cognitive impairment. Reliable, punctual, accepts additional responsibility without complaint. Continues to be one of the most respected nurses on the unit. The director of nursing at the time, Rebecca Strout, signed off on a 2017 review with a handwritten note in the margin. "Colleen," she wrote, "is the reason families keep telling us they sleep at night." By 2019, her daughter was a freshman at the University of Maine. Her husband's small heating and cooling business was struggling against 2 national chains that had moved into the county, and the second mortgage they had taken 3 years earlier to renovate the kitchen and replace the roof was 8 years from being paid off. Bruce's bookings dropped 22% over the year. Colleen's hours at Sparrowdale stayed steady, but the household's margin was thinning. The couple had no savings beyond a small retirement account and the equity in the Cape on Spruce Hollow Road. In November of 2019, Colleen's mother, who had been living independently in a small apartment in Bucksport, had a stroke. The skilled nursing care she needed was not fully covered by her Medicare supplemental policy, and the family was billed approximately $11,000 in out-of-pocket costs across a 6-month rehabilitation. Colleen and her 2 sisters split that bill. The same month she wrote her share of the check, the Cape's furnace gave out and was replaced for $4,700 on a store credit account at 18% interest. The Christmas tree that year was a small one, set up 2 days before the holiday and taken down 4 days after. She returned to her shift at Sparrowdale in January of 2020, looking the same way she had looked in every January for 7 years. Scrubs in the laundry, lunch in the bag, 4-minute commute to a wing where 91-year-olds called her by her first name. That month, she opened a drawer in resident Harold Wexford's room and removed his withdrawal slip book. Sparrowdale Senior Care occupied a low brick building on the eastern edge of town, 2/10 of a mile from Penobscot Coastal Bank's Sparrowdale branch and 3 blocks from the IGA. The facility licensed 62 beds across 2 wings, a 34-bed assisted living section for residents who needed help with medication and bathing, but could still walk to the dining hall on their own, and a 28-bed skilled nursing wing for residents with significant medical or cognitive impairment. Colleen Aristide had primary care responsibility for the skilled nursing wing across 2 shifts per week and rotated through the assisted living side on the others. The skilled nursing wing's resident population was, by the architectural and cultural design of long-term care in rural Maine, a population whose private financial life was largely invisible to administrators. Most residents had moved into Sparrowdale from homes they had owned for decades, and they had brought with them the apparatus of a banking relationship that predated electronic billing by half a century. Checkbooks were kept in nightstand drawers. Withdrawal slip books, the small carbonless booklets issued by Penobscot Coastal for in-person cash retrievals, sat alongside reading glasses and family photographs. Bank statements arrived in the mail, sometimes addressed to the resident at the facility, sometimes forwarded to a son or daughter in another state. The system was built on a series of unspoken assumptions. The first assumption was that elderly residents in a skilled nursing wing were not making large cash withdrawals and therefore did not need oversight of their banking. The second assumption was that family members were reviewing statements when they arrived. The third assumption was that the nursing staff was not in a position to access residents' private effects in any meaningful way, because the institutional structure did not contemplate such access as a vulnerability. The first assumption was wrong. The second was inconsistent. The third was catastrophically wrong. Penobscot Coastal Bank, a regional with 11 branches across coastal Maine, operated under its own set of customer service assumptions, equally unspoken. The Sparrowdale branch served a customer base that skewed older than the bank's coastal averages, and its tellers had developed a workflow optimized for elderly clients whose banking patterns predated electronic transfer. The branch processed a heavy volume of in-person withdrawal slips. It saw daughters of customers, sons of customers, nieces of customers, neighbors of customers, and home health aides of customers presenting at the counter with a signed slip and a verbal explanation. Over years of operation, the branch's tellers had developed what bank examiners would later describe in a closed-door review as a presumption of authorization pattern. The assumption that anyone arriving with a withdrawal slip for an established elderly customer was operating with that customer's permission. The branch's compliance protocols did not require teller-initiated calls to elderly account holders to confirm a presenting assistance authority. They did not require photo identification of the presenter to be cross-checked against an authorized representative list, Because most elderly customers had not designated an authorized representative in writing, the slip was processed. The cash was disbursed. The transaction was photographed by the imaging system that captured every paper instrument that passed through the branch. That imaging system had been installed in 2014 as part of a regional compliance upgrade. It existed not to detect fraud against elderly clients, because the bank did not contemplate the architecture of such fraud, but to satisfy regulatory record retention requirements. It captured the front and back of every withdrawal slip, time-stamped, indexed by account number, and stored on a server in the bank's Bangor data center. Across the 4 years of Aristay's scheme, it would capture, without alarm, every forged signature she would ever present. The first withdrawal slip Colleen Aristay forged was processed at the Sparrowdale branch of Penobscot Coastal Bank on the morning of February 11, 2020. The account belonged to Harold Wexford, an 89-year-old retired millwright from East Sparrowdale who had been a resident of the skilled nursing wing for 19 months and whose son lived in Phoenix. The amount was $400. The signature on the slip was a reasonable facsimile of Mr. Wexford's, practiced 4 times the night before on a notepad Aristay would later dispose of. The presenting assistant line bore Aristay's initials and a notation she had drafted herself. C.A. Sparrowdale, retrieving for resident. The teller who processed the slip, a 15-year branch employee, did not look up. She knew Aristay by sight. Aristay had been the presenting party on routine slips for 2 other Sparrowdale residents in prior months. Slips that had been authentic, prepared at the resident's written request, processed without issue. The $400 withdrawal was disbursed in 20s. Aristay walked out with the cash in a sealed Penobscot coastal envelope and drove the 0.4 of a mile back to the facility. That night, the cash was in a manila folder in the back of a filing drawer in Aristay's home office on Spruce Hollow Road. The second mortgage payment due that week was $348.71. She paid it in cash at the credit union on her lunch break the following day. The second forgery was on March 9, 2020. $600 from the account of Doris Lanigan, a 91-year-old retired schoolteacher with advanced dementia whose only surviving family was a great-niece in Vancouver. Mrs. Lanigan had not personally written a check in over 3 years. Her withdrawal slip book had been in the bottom drawer of her room's nightstand since her admission to Sparrowdale, and Aristay had moved it to a manila envelope in her own locker on the day of Mrs. Lanigan's intake. By the summer of 2020, the pattern had become method. Aristay selected residents whose accounts she had observed to carry balances substantial enough to support recurring withdrawals without triggering the bank's low balance alerts. She avoided residents whose adult children lived in Maine or visited frequently. She preferred residents whose statements were mailed to the facility because she could intercept them at the nurse's station mailbox before the administrative office sorted them. She kept a small notebook in her car's glove compartment listing, in her own shorthand, which residents' books she had taken, which slips she had used, and the running balance she believed remained available before a withdrawal would draw attention. The scheme escalated by increments. In 2020, the total drained across 3 residents was approximately $41,000. In 2021, the total rose to $108,000 across 5 residents. In 2022, with 2 more residents added to the rotation, the annual figure reached $156,000. By 2023, Aristay was retrieving cash on slips bearing the signatures of 9 separate residents, several of whom had died during the scheme, and whose accounts she continued to draw against until family members closed them. The mechanics of the forgery itself became routine. She had a thin file of signature exemplars she had photographed with her phone. Pages from residents' personal correspondence, the signature lines of consent forms in their charts, signed greeting cards in their rooms. She practiced each signature in a spiral notebook she kept in a locked drawer of the bedroom dresser. She prepared the slips at her kitchen table after her husband had gone to bed. She processed them at the Sparrowdale branch during her lunch breaks, never more than 1 slip per visit, never more than 2 visits per week. She used the cash for second mortgage payments, credit card minimums, the propane bill, her daughter's tuition installments, the property taxes on the Cape, and small things. A new winter coat in 2021. A microwave to replace the one that had died. A weekend in Boothbay Harbor in the summer of 2022. None of the spending was extravagant. None of it raised the eyebrows of neighbors or co-workers. The household on Spruce Hollow Road continued to look like every other household on the street. One car, one truck, a Christmas tree in the front window from Thanksgiving to New Year's, a yard that was kept up but not landscaped. At Sparrowdale, Aristay's evaluations continued to describe her in the same language they always had. Exceptional rapport with residents, trusted by families, one of the unit's most reliable nurses. She received a $2 an hour raise in 2022 and a small year-end bonus in 2023. The director of nursing recommended her for a charge nurse position that fall, and she declined, citing the increased administrative responsibility. The administrative responsibility was not what she wanted to avoid. What she wanted to avoid was the chart review obligation that would have required her to look at family contact logs more often than her own scheme could survive. In the 4 years of the operation, not a single colleague reported a concern. Not a single resident verbalized an account discrepancy that could not be explained as confusion. Not a single family member produced a question that could not be deflected with a kind word and a reassuring phone call. The system, designed for trust, performed exactly as it had been designed to perform. We are about to get into how this finally came apart. Before we do, if you have made it this far, you already know this channel is different. These cases do not get the coverage they deserve, and the people on the receiving end of them deserve to have their stories told. Subscribe if you agree. We do this every single week. Heather Pellerin lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a 3-bedroom ranch with her husband, 2 teenagers, and a beagle named Otis. She was a regional manager for a benefits administration firm and the kind of person who kept tax prep folders organized by month going back 6 years. She visited her mother at Sparrowdale 4 times a year, at Easter, the 4th of July, Thanksgiving, and Christmas, and called her every Sunday at 4 in the afternoon. Maggie Pellerin, 84 years old, had been a resident of the skilled nursing wing for 2 years and 7 months. She had moderate dementia, brittle bones, and a quiet, steady affection for her only daughter. In the 3rd week of January 2024, Heather sat down at her kitchen table in Charlotte with a Penobscot Coastal Bank statement her mother's mail had been forwarding her since 2022. She was preparing her mother's 1099-INT documentation for the tax filing season. She had done this exercise 3 times before and had never found anything more interesting than a duplicate dividend posting that the bank had self-corrected within a week. This time was different. The December statement showed a $400 cash withdrawal on the 3rd of the month, processed at the Sparrowdale branch. Heather flipped back to November. Another withdrawal, $600, on the 8th. She pulled October, 2 withdrawals, $400 and $350. September, 2 more. She walked back 12 months, then 24, then 36, with a yellow legal pad and a pen at her elbow. By the time she had finished, she had counted 43 cash withdrawals across her mother's account, totaling $58,400. She called her mother on the phone at 4 o'clock that Sunday and asked, gently, whether she had been retrieving cash from the bank. Her mother, who had not left the Sparrowdale skilled nursing wing without family escort in 19 months, said she had not. She did not remember asking anyone to retrieve cash for her. She did not remember signing any withdrawal slips. She wanted to know whether something was wrong. On Monday morning, Heather Pellerin made 3 phone calls. The first was to the fraud department of Penobscot Coastal Bank in Bangor, where she was connected to an investigator named Marisol Edgecombe. She read the withdrawal dates and amounts aloud. Edgecombe asked her to send the statements by secure email and said she would pull the imaging on the underlying slips that afternoon. The second call was to Maine Adult Protective Services, where Heather was assigned to an investigator named Brendan Tasker. The third call was to the Sparrowdale Senior Care Administrative Line, where she asked, in a tone she did not believe was angry, but which Patricia Hollings, the administrator, would later describe as unmistakably steady, whether her mother's nursing care team had been authorized to retrieve cash from her account. Hollings said no facility policy authorized such retrievals and that she would investigate internally. That afternoon, Marisol Edgecombe pulled 43 withdrawal slip images from Penobscot Coastal's archive. 41 of them bore the presenting assistant notation Aristei had been writing for almost 4 years. The handwriting on the signatures, when set side by side with Maggie Pellerin's authentic signature from her account opening card of 1978, did not match. Edgecombe forwarded the images to the bank's general counsel and to the Maine Bureau of Financial Institutions within the hour. By Wednesday of that week, the bank's fraud unit had begun pulling withdrawal slip imaging for every elderly account holder whose statements were mailed to or in care of Sparrowdale Senior Care. The dataset that came back was the dataset that ended Colleen Aristei's career and her freedom. The expanded pool covered the 4 years from January 2020 through January 2024 and produced 271 withdrawal slip images across 9 separate Sparrowdale resident accounts. Every one of those images carried the same elements: a forged signature whose strokes did not match the resident's authenticated exemplars on file, a presenting assistant notation in Colleen Aristei's handwriting, and a date that mapped to one of Aristei's documented shifts at the facility within a 4-hour window. Marisol Edgecombe assembled the dataset into a single binder. The accompanying summary, prepared for transmission to law enforcement, listed the 9 residents by name, the dates of their admission, and, where applicable, the dates of their deaths. 3 of the 9 had died during the scheme: Harold Wexford in October 2022, Doris Lanigan in March 2023, Earl Bouchard in August 2023. The accounts of all 3 had continued to be drawn against after their deaths, on slips bearing signatures dated days, and in 2 cases weeks after the residents themselves had stopped signing anything. The deceased residents' families, who in 2 cases had not yet closed the accounts because their probate work was unfinished, had not noticed. The Hancock County Sheriff's Financial Crimes Unit assigned the case to Sergeant Roland Vautour on the 5th of February. Vautour was a 22-year veteran with a small office, a methodical pace, and a quiet contempt for people who stole from the elderly. He spent 4 days reviewing Edgecombe's binder, 2 days interviewing Penobscot coastal tellers at the Sparrowdale branch, and 1 afternoon at Sparrowdale Senior Care, reviewing Aristei's shift records with Administrator Patricia Hollings. The teller interviews produced consistent statements. Aristei had been a familiar face at the branch since at least 2018. She had presented withdrawal slips on behalf of Sparrowdale residents on dozens of occasions. She had been pleasant, patient, professional. She had never raised concern. One teller, Lindsay Cournoyer, told Vautour that she had assumed for years that the facility had a formal arrangement with the bank under which nursing staff were authorized to retrieve resident cash. No such arrangement existed. The shift record review at Sparrowdale produced a mapping that closed the last gap in the evidence. Every one of the 271 slip dates corresponded to a day on which Aristei had been logged into the facility for at least 4 hours. Several of the slips had been processed within the lunch break window of her shifts. On February 19, 2024, Sergeant Vautour and a deputy executed a search warrant at the Cape Style House on Spruce Hollow Road. They were there for 2 hours and 17 minutes. In the back of a filing drawer in the home office, they recovered a manila folder containing 7 withdrawal slip books belonging to current and former Sparrowdale residents, including 2 booklets whose owners had been deceased for over a year. In a locked drawer of the bedroom dresser, they recovered a spiral notebook in which Aristei had practiced signature exemplars across more than 90 pages, organized by resident name with the dates of practice noted in the margins. In the glove compartment of her 2017 Subaru Outback, they recovered a smaller notebook listing residents, slip numbers, and approximate running balances. Her financial accounts told the rest of the story. Cash deposits at the local credit union, small, irregular, and consistent with the scheme's monthly retrieval pattern, totaled approximately $390,000 across the 4 years. Cash payments traced through receipts and statements accounted for another $76,000. The total was within $4,000 of the bank's calculation of the scheme's gross. Sergeant Vautour brought all of it back to the substation that evening and began drafting the warrant for Colleen Ariste's arrest. The arrest was executed at 6:52 on the morning of February 22, 2024, in the driveway of the Cape on Spruce Hollow Road. Ariste was loading her insulated lunch bag and a travel mug of coffee into the front seat of her Subaru. She wore a clean set of light blue scrubs and a dark green fleece. Her shift at Sparrowdale was scheduled to begin at 7. Sergeant Vautour and a deputy approached from a marked county vehicle that had been parked 2 houses down. Vautour identified himself, displayed his badge, and informed Ariste that there was an arrest warrant in her name for vulnerable adult abuse, forgery, theft by unauthorized taking, and aggravated identity theft. Ariste set the lunch bag on the hood of her car. She looked at the deputy. She looked at Vautour. She did not move for several seconds. I knew this day would come. Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. I know. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. I want my husband. He's still inside. Can you let me tell him? The deputy walked Ariste to the front porch. Bruce Ariste opened the inner door in a flannel robe. The conversation between them lasted 41 seconds. Ariste said, "Bruce, I'm so sorry." She said it twice. He did not respond. She turned and walked toward the cruiser without being prompted. In the back seat, she said one more thing before invoking her right to counsel. "Tell Heather Pellerine I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done what I did to her mother." Vautour wrote the statement down word for word in the booking notes when they arrived at the substation 40 minutes later. Colleen Ariste was arraigned in Hancock County Superior Court on the morning of February 23, 2024, on a complaint filed by Assistant District Attorney Corinne Marchetti. The charges totaled 14 counts under Maine state law and 1 federal count of aggravated identity theft. The federal count later separated for prosecution in the United States District Court for the District of Maine. The state charges included 9 counts of vulnerable adult abuse in the financial category under Title 22, Parv 3477, 4 counts of forgery under 17A, Ms. Parv 703, and 1 consolidated count of theft by unauthorized taking aggregated under 17A, Emrez Parv 353, for amounts exceeding $10,000. Bail was set at $150,000 cash or surety. The Aristes posted the bond through a second position lien on the Cape on Spruce Hollow Road, which they had finished paying down to within $19,000 of clear title. Colleen was released into her husband's custody with conditions including surrender of